Seattle has become the first city in the United States of America to add caste to the anti-discrimination statute. This is a historic decision, but one that is being debated fiercely both in India and abroad. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Moments from now, we'll be meeting Kshama Sawant, the Seattle Councilwoman who has steered and been the pioneering energy behind a historic and a landmark decision in the American city to add caste to the anti-discrimination legislation in the city. It is a decision that has been hailed by many, many people, but it has also been criticized, in particular by Hindu American groups that allege that it will lead to Hinduphobia in the classroom. Kshama herself is India born. She led a dramatic victory, an electoral victory in 2019, contesting against and winning a candidate who was backed by the all-powerful Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame. When she stood at her victory podium, the message prominently read, "Tax Amazon." Kshama Sawant has been a prominent member of the Occupy Wall Street movements in Seattle and is the only Indian American of the council that moved to do something that could now get replicated in cities across the United States of America. So let us not underestimate the import of what has only recently happened. Let's go across to Kshama, who joins us from Seattle this evening in India and morning her time. I'm kind of losing track of the time zones here. Good to see you, Kshama. And of course, whether you're for or against this decision, it is historic, it's landmark, it's going to change a whole lot of things. You were born in India. You did not grow up with any first-hand experience of caste discrimination. Why did you feel so strongly about moving this law?
As you said correctly, Barkha, yeah, I grew up in a Brahmin family in Mumbai, but while I didn't experience it firsthand, it was very obvious. It was very evident all around me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has made this observation that there is a deep divide between the oppressed caste community and the rest of the Indian community. And at the same time, it actually, it's also consistent with my overall observation of poverty and inequality in India and poverty and inequality in the United States as well. So for me, as a socialist who's fighting against economic exploitation and oppression as a whole, fighting for this law which bans caste discrimination went hand in hand with the other victories that we have fought to win, like the $15 an hour minimum wage. You mentioned the Tax Amazon movement. The year after that election you mentioned, where we defeated Amazon's millions of dollars, we won the Amazon tax, which provides hundreds of millions of dollars by taxing big corporations to fund publicly affordable housing. So the fight against caste discrimination in the United States is very consistent with the overall position that my council office and Socialist Alternative, my organization, has taken to fight alongside and for the working class as a whole and for the most oppressed among them.
Now, of course, as I said in my introduction, there are many, many people who have hailed what you have pioneered and steered as historic, and there are expectations that many other cities could follow. But there's also been some questions. Why? There have been Hindu American groups that have cited a Carnegie survey that basically says that while roughly half of all Hindu Americans do identify with the caste group, only 5% actually spoke about experiencing caste discrimination themselves. I'm sure you've seen this data, it's been quoted extensively. How do you counter the fact that caste is, while of course it's a structural and deeply felt reality of India, in the American context isn't experienced directly by Indian Americans? This has been an argument raised against your move. How do you counter it?
Well, first of all, we should note that the organizations that have opposed this legislation are organizations like the Hindu American Foundation and the Coalition of Hindus of North America, who, if you look at their websites, have an overall right-wing agenda, in fact, very much aligning with the agenda of the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and the Modi regime as a whole. And so it's not like they have a right-wing position on just this issue. They are generally far right organizations. And if you look at the data, I mean, yes, I'm very, very familiar with the arguments that they have made. I mean, there are two data sets that have provided us statistical evidence, one from Equality Labs, one from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And that's the one they're mentioning. But they're actually doing a willfully misrepresentation reading of the data that have been provided by the Carnegie study, which actually says that as a matter of fact, they say that if anything, the data that they have could very likely be underreporting, because many oppressed caste workers don't feel empowered or emboldened to speak up openly. So it's there, there's a self-selection, self-censorship, and this is a very common thing in statistical studies, that when you do self-reporting surveys, that's one of the things you have to contend with. So I have no doubt that future studies, on the basis of this law, where people are feeling more emboldened to speak openly about the discrimination they face on the basis of caste, we'll actually see strong data. But having said that, it's also important to understand what that 5% means. I mean, that 5% is a lot of people who are facing caste discrimination, not to mention the underreporting. Because if you look at the issue of trans rights, for example, that's a big issue in the United States, and it should be, because nobody should face discrimination. And the trans issues are a very important issue in the progressive discourse as a whole. If you look at the numbers, it's just over 1% of the United States population identifies as trans. So would progressives be saying, well, that's not important enough because it's just 1% of the population? No, obviously not. What progressives have said is that nobody should face discrimination, and it's obvious that trans people, trans community members face some of the most horrendous form of oppression or even violence, and so we need to push back against that. The same kind of outlook we have to bring for caste issues, and in fact the numbers are even stronger. And as the concentration of South Asian community has immigrant workers has grown in the United States, you're seeing caste discrimination also become a more pervasive issue.
Now, most Americans understand race, they don't understand caste. With this legislation, if you were to apply it to real life, what do you actually think is possible now? What is a kind of recourse to someone who believes that they have been discriminated on the basis of their caste? And in your experience, just one more thing, what shapes and form does this caste discrimination actually take in the American context?
I think that's your second question is probably a good starting point to talk about the first question, which is how will it be enforced? So how does caste discrimination manifest itself? Some examples I can relate based on the hundreds of workers that have spoken up. And it just so happens that it's mainly tech workers who feel emboldened enough to speak up. I think more lower income workers in more precarious visa situations are less likely to speak up. As you know, this goes back to the underreporting question as well. So if you look at tech workers who have spoken up, the hundreds of them that have spoken up about the caste discrimination they have faced, it runs the spectrum of all the corporations, like Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, Cisco. Workers in all these corporations have said that this is something they have experienced. And the way it manifests itself is some of the more serious issues are being denied raises or promotions, or being given negative appraisals by your dominant caste managers simply because of your caste, not related to your performance. And we saw a very important letter that was published anonymously by 30 Dalit, oppressed caste women software engineers. This was published in the Washington Post, actually, in which they talk about all of the instances that I mentioned just now, the kind of discrimination you face as a tech worker. But on top of that, they said that they also face sexual harassment because, they're both women and oppressed caste workers. And so you see some really serious examples of discrimination in the workplace. And the way this law will be enforced, specific to Seattle for a moment, just to talk about Seattle, because this is where the law was passed. The city of Seattle already has, even before we won this law, a very comprehensive anti-discrimination law. And the principal mechanism with which this law needs to be enforced and has been enforced is through the right of private action, meaning going to the courts. So in other words, if you are, for example, gender discrimination is banned. If you are a woman who has faced discrimination in the workplace, for example, but not just limited to the workplace. The law is, as I said, is very comprehensive. But if you face discrimination in the workplace as a woman, you have the right to go to court and say there is a law that outlaws this, that bans this, and yet I have faced this, and so this corporation must be held accountable. They must be held liable. That's the principal mechanism of enforcement. But of course, we will need to build a movement around that as well, because obviously the judicial system is not on the side of workers.
One of the concerns that has been expressed is that because there is a cultural dissonance, because Americans don't fully understand the caste fault line, this could lead to. I'm not saying this. I'm saying this is one of the concerns that's been expressed by other groups, that this could lead to a kind of reservation about hiring Indians. I don't see it. Most Indians are leading all of these tech companies. Literally, each one of them, you can count them all and do a roster list of Indian Americans at the top of these companies. But there is a concern that the Indian who isn't a Sundar Pichai, for example, or isn't a Satya Nadella, could find herself being judged or accused of discrimination, and that a manager or a recruiter may say this is too complicated, let's just avoid this group altogether. This is a concern that's been expressed. How do you address that concern?
Well, first of all, I think it's first and foremost, it's important to be much more open about what these supposed concerns, and I call them supposed concerns because really they are right-wing talking points. I have not heard anybody who claims to be progressive to have raised these arguments. In fact, even the progressive Democrats actually did repeat some of these what I call right-wing talking points, and there was huge anger from the thousands of people that we helped organize to win this. I mean, there was overwhelming unity among working people. It was not only oppressed caste people who were fighting for this, it was also dominant caste Hindus, Brahmins like myself were fighting for this, Hindus of all castes, Muslims, Sikhs, American workers whom we were educating about this issue were also supporting this. And in fact, if you look at other anti-discrimination laws, for just to take an example, just to draw out how dishonest this argument really is, it's not an honest concern, because if we look at anti-discrimination laws that protect women, for example, would these same people go around claiming that having an anti-discrimination law that protects women, unfortunately, will be detrimental to men, and that's why we should not pass this law? That's how we need to think through this and understand that these are not honest concerns, and that's why it's no coincidence that it has been brought forward by these Hindu right-wing organizations. And in fact, one of the most prominent organizations that in fact, the most prominent organization that opposed this legislation is none other than the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, which most of your listeners will probably know about.
Mm-hmm. But that's a whole separate conversation, because if you look at the election data in India, you will see that while there are Dalits who reject the right wing, there are also Dalits who embrace it politically. So this is it's a kind of complicated thing, which it's not that all Dalits, in particular in Uttar Pradesh, and I know you were born in India, your family's from India, so you're somewhat familiar with the politics. This is a fault line that gets debated. In UP, we've seen Dalits actually voting for the BJP, which has often been sort of called by its critics as a Brahminical party. So that political identification, I think, is a separate debate. Where I agree with you is a structural inequality that needs to be addressed. But what I'm curious about now is what happens in other states. Many people are not familiar with how laws are made in the United States of America. And so I know in California, for example, this is a very live debate. It started again with the tech company Cisco. That's where this sort of got framed. What do you see happening now that Seattle has legislated?
What is I can talk about what's possible, but also how it's not automatic. I mean, what's possible now is the sky's the limit. In other words, Seattle, as you said, has become the first city because of our fighting movement to have won this ban on caste discrimination. But it's not become the first city only in the United States. It's the first city globally outside South Asia to have banned caste discrimination. So the significance is extremely historic, and there is potential now to win similar kinds of laws in other cities. You mentioned California. Obviously, there are many activists who actually live in the Bay Area and joined us for the vote. Believe it or not, they flew all the way to Seattle to join us for the vote, to speak, give their own public testimonials in city council chambers, who now want to win it there as well. But whether it will happen or not, that's the part that's not automatic. That's what I'm talking about. Because even in Seattle, we were able to win only because our movement was very clear who is up, whom we are up against. Like, understanding that in order to go against the right wing and defeat them, in order to force the Democrats, who are not on our side either, just to explain to your viewers, I am one socialist or Marxist on the city council, and there are 8 Democrats. And every vote that we have won, whether it was $15 an hour or Amazon tax or renters' rights, and we have won incredible victories through my office because we have had a fighting strategy. But every victory we have won has been because of that approach, because of understanding very clearly who's on our side and who's not, and understanding that we have to build a broad-based working class unity to win it. And part of that fighting strategy, and it goes to your earlier point as well, is understanding that the right wing is not making innocent or innocuous arguments, but that there is this nefarious agenda behind it. And the only way you can defeat these right wing ideas is to go on the offensive, not be defensive, but explain very boldly what these arguments actually hide. They actually hide a dangerous agenda of maintaining these kinds of differences in our society, where actually end up being very oppressive to a whole section of the population. And in fact, to your earlier point about, yes, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, what has happened in India and UP elections are an example where the BJP has succeeded, the right wing has succeeded in using these existing divisions to further divide the people. And the only, and actually succeeding in dividing OBCs, the other backward castes, and getting their votes as well. Now we know, we can see that they are heading to more of this kind of strategy where they are trying to gain the votes of the Pasmanda Muslims, who are oppressed caste Muslims, in order to win victories in the central government elections next year. The reason I'm bringing this up is the only way to defeat this Modi agenda is to build working class unity across caste, across religion, and that's what's missing in India. We don't have any political party that is able to do that. But the reason I'm saying that is because the very reason we won in Seattle is because we understood that we need broad-based working class unity across caste and across religion. That is why the right wing was not able to defeat us.
Well, of course, on the politics of it, we can have a sort of separate program another time. How different groups vote differently. It's a democracy. People have the right to vote for who they want to, of course, and that must be underlined. But my question to you is, and it's actually more something I want to understand more deeply. Race, for example, is recognized to be not just sort of a benchmark on which you can complain about discrimination, but also something that is at the core of how people think about diversity and inclusion and hiring practices and best practices. I'm keen to understand that now that caste has been recognized as such in Seattle, does it mean that organizations will also look at a more inclusive policy when it comes to hiring? Does it extend to that? Is that something that can actually be taken to court, or is that am I overreading the impact of this legislation?
I don't think you're overreading it at all, and I think that's an excellent question. Just to clarify, firstly, though, that the Seattle law, and in fact, I'm sure this is true for many other cities, already outlaws discrimination on the basis of race or color, but that still needs to be enforced. Because the fact is, unfortunately, even though some of these laws have already been in place, maybe even for decades, enforcement of the law itself is a separate question. So even though Seattle, for example, has had a law against discrimination on the basis of gender or religion or race, we still see workers facing that. In fact, because my office fights for the working class, we have many workers coming to us and telling us about the problems that they face. We have renters coming to us, telling us about the problems they face. So just to give you an example, we have had back workers saying that they still continue to face discrimination in the workplace. So unfortunately, that's not surprising. We've also heard of Muslim, South Asian Muslim workers have told us, many of them who supported us in this struggle for the ban against caste discrimination, they came out in solidarity with us. They're telling us that they face discrimination in the workplace for being Muslim, even though the law for years has, on paper, says you should not discriminate on the basis of religion. So in answer to your question, I think ultimately, the impact of this law will depend on how much we continue organizing workers to have this enforced in the first place. And that would, if we can have some high profile enforcement, holding some big corporations accountable in the courts on the basis of caste discrimination, I have no doubt that that impact will spill over to the question of racial discrimination as well. So, it won't just be limited to caste. The good things that can happen spill over beyond that. And to that end, actually, Barkha, my office is actually starting to organize a public hearing, hopefully in May, where we will bring caste discriminated workers and religion discriminated workers like Muslim workers together to speak openly about what they're facing.
Well, in a way, it's similar to what happened in the gender movement. There's an intersectionality of all of these discriminations that needs a kind of unifying thread. So I do get what you're saying, and we'll look forward to monitoring that meeting. I have to ask you in the end. I know audiences in India would be keen to know a little bit more about you. You were born in Maharashtra, but you're actually from Karnataka. You studied economics and computer engineering. I know that much. But tell us a little bit more about how, when you ran actually for the post of councilwoman, you were actually taking on Amazon and Bezos literally directly, because the opponent against you was backed by Amazon. So I just want our audience to be a little more familiar with the fact that you are used to being somewhat of a giant slayer. Tell us a little bit about that election.
Thank you so much for that generous description. Yes, as you said, I was born in Maharashtra, and I was raised there in Mumbai. My family is from Bangalore. And throughout my life, from my earliest memory, actually, Barkha, I remember feeling real outrage and anger at poverty, inequality, including caste oppression, but not only limited to that, also the real sort of the ocean of poverty that you see, despite the fact that people are working hard. And then this whole section of working class and middle class people who are working so hard and just trying to get by. And then you have a very small minority at the top who seem to siphon off most of the wealth. And obviously we are seeing the new incarnation of that with the billionaire class in India, with Adani and Ambani and other billionaires. And when I came to the United States, it was really eye-opening for me, because it was clear to me that obviously the situation in America is not the same as in India. Poverty here exists on a different scale and in a different intensity, obviously not as intense. However, what was eye-opening for me was to see that even in the richest country in the world under capitalism, you see not only poverty, but also the absence of socialized medicine. You can't even have healthcare, decent healthcare. Public services like transportation are deeply underfunded. Infrastructure is languishing. And again, here you have the billionaire class, and on top of that, US imperialism. So anyway, all of this sort of crystallized for me that these are not individual separate problems in their own boxes, but really originating from the capitalist system itself, which is what led me to socialism and joining my organization, Socialist Alternative. And through our organization, we ran campaigns for city council. So it wasn't my personal decision. It wasn't like I'm not building my own personal career. In fact, I take home only the average worker's wage, and the rest of my 6-figure salary after taxes goes into funding social movements. And nobody in the establishment is my friend. I'm public enemy number one as far as the political establishment, the Democratic Party, and certainly big business, as you said. So defeating the big business like Amazon is headquartered here, defeating these big corporations and billionaires in 4 elections that we have won. We have never been defeated. That really took, again, a strategy of building a real base among ordinary people, working people. And what's interesting about this is that the billionaires of Amazon are completely opposed to us, but the workers at Amazon, including tech workers, have very much been in solidarity with us.
Well, I have to say this, that you have steered something that is probably going to be a template for a lot of other cities to look at, whether they accept it, reject it. We're going to see. I have a feeling that this is also going to get dragged out through the courts. A lot of this is going to turn legal very soon. So you've certainly triggered not just a debate in the US, you've triggered a debate in India, and it's a very critical debate for our times. Thank you for starting that conversation that I think was waiting to happen. No matter which side of the debate you come on, this is a very important conversation for us to have openly and without hesitation and without defensiveness. Thank you, Kshama Sawant. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We'll follow this issue very closely. We look forward to the public hearing you're going to host in the next couple of months. And thank you very much. Take care, and thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so much, Barkha. Real pleasure.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.